Welcome to A Seat at the Table, a podcast powered by The Ice House, a place for courageous conversations empowering diversity and community in business. You are part of the conversation and have as much to say as anyone else. Hello everybody and welcome to the A Seat at the Table podcast. Today we have Katie Jacobs with us. She's a business leader, brand marketing and commercial strategy specialist, former advisory board chair at Naveya and Sloane, director at Auckland Theatre Company, very cool, trustee of Great Potentials Foundation and former country manager of Moet Hennessy, and marketing director at Milk Photo Books, a wealth of international marketing experience. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here.
If that didn't make you guys tired just listening to all that she's done, here we go. So quick fire, Katie. We always start with a couple quick fire questions and just get into the mood. So when are you most relaxed?
For me, I think, to be fair, it sounds like a bit of a Tinder profile, but long walks on the beach. But actually by myself, so probably not so much Tinder profile. But yeah, some good tunes in my ears and just being able to walk for ages and think about life and look at the horizon.
Oh, good stuff. What's one thing you are curious about right now?
It's always hard for me to choose just one thing. I think probably the state of democracy and politics in the world is kind of absolutely scary and fascinating at the same time. And probably AI, speaking again about scary and fascinating. But where are we going and what's around the corner? Super interesting.
Cool. What does a day in the life of Katie look like?
It's pretty fluid for me. We have my partner's kids every second week, so every second week I'm up early and feeding the kidden and doing school lunches and school drop-offs, and otherwise trying to exercise or whatever. But I'm contracting, and I've a couple of different boards, as you mentioned, Briar. So every day is a little bit different, and really kind of depends what's on the agenda.
Bit of variety.
Yeah, absolutely. That's cool.
Favorite restaurant or cafe right now?
Well, I used to live in Japan, and it has been far too long since I've been there. So for me, the closest that I can get to beautiful, authentic Japanese food is Kokoro in Brown Street in Ponsonby. I absolutely adore it. Chef Makoto's amazing, and whenever I need my fix, that's where I head.
That's interesting to know.
I may have popped that one in because of your background. I was like, she's a foodie. She knows good food and wine and drink.
Note to self. I'll share another one that you might know about already, but afterward. Favorite app or tool? I really hate admin. So as a contractor, at the moment, I've discovered Henry, which I absolutely love. It's so easy to use and takes care of a whole lot of stuff that I really don't want to have to take care of myself. So I'm super impressed by them and watching their company because I think they're doing great stuff. They are.
Yeah, very cool.
If you were to write a book tomorrow, what would you write about?
Well, I've always had three things I said I want to do in my life. One is get a postgraduate degree. Another is try not to be a typical Kiwi and actually learn another language fluently. Nice. And the third is write a book. So I've accomplished one of those three, and the write a book is not the one I've accomplished. But I think if I'm an English lit major, it would definitely be a novel. Wow. So I continuously have a couple of ideas floating around in the brain, but definitely a novel.
Very cool.
Cool. And what gives you a sense of purpose?
So for me, I'm really motivated by learning. So learning, exploring, and new ideas, and how I can be part of new ideas, and contributing to why I'm here in the world and putting something new out in the world is something that's really, really important to me.
Oh, good stuff. Thank you.
Very cool.
Very cool.
Following from that, we're starting to get to know a little bit about you, which is cool. How would you describe yourself? Tell us a little bit about you, Katie.
Kind of following on from that purpose, for me, I
I really love learning, and I really love having a wide variety of kind of stimulation and influences in my world. So for me, the idea of living a really rich, fulfilled, well-rounded life is super important. Specifically, music. I'm a foodie. I love the theatre. I love books. I'm definitely following all the latest whatever's happening on Netflix. So having a whole rich stimulation and rich sources is something that I kind of love about life. I think a friend once said to me years and years ago, she said the whole key in life is to be interested and interesting. And I just love that idea. So for me, that's kind of, what I hope to be, and definitely love and interest in other people as well.
Very cool.
I'm always really curious to go back and understand a little bit more about how your childhood or your upbringing actually has been formative to who you are today. Can you share a little bit about that?
Absolutely. I'm super, super lucky. I come from a really loving, gorgeous family. My grandparents, I knew 3 of my grandparents. My grandmother only died a couple of years ago, and so lucky to have her for so long. And my parents are incredible. They are both kind of they both have very successful careers, but they are also really interested in lots, very well read, very interested in the world around them. My father was a very well-renowned engineer, and my mother's a food writer. So I think for them, that idea of a stimulating life, talking about ideas, talking about what's happening in the world, meeting interesting people, a global perspective on life is something that I grew up with, and something that's absolutely a formative and a big part of who I am. I think even, to be fair, even the things that I think, oh my gosh, it's not a great quality about myself, you'll then find out something about mum or dad that's like, it's all genetics. It's all come from them, the good and the bad, which I'm super proud of, and really happy to be part of such a great, and very lucky to be part of such a cool family.
How awesome. Only child or siblings?
No, sorry, Scott. I have a brother who's awesome as well, and he's got 3 kids and a gorgeous wife, and I'm really happy to kind of extended the family out that way as well.
Cool.
Oh, wow. I love as well that global mindset from your childhood that's obviously then walked you through that career journey, right?
Absolutely.
Can you unpack that career journey for us? Because it's an exciting one, and I really want to hear more about it.
Yeah, look, absolutely. I think in that, when I was at university, I did a BA BCom, and one of the reasons I decided to do a BA BCom in English Literature and Economics was because I didn't want to be put in a box. I think I didn't kind of want my future mapped out for me, and I literally purposefully chose something that wouldn't do that. And at the time I was at uni, I'm sure it still happens, a scheme called SWAP, which is an American, Canadian, New Zealand, I think Australia too, SWAP scheme for students, where you can go and work in America or Canada, I guess, for a certain amount of time, and it's the SWAPsies, obviously, by the name. And for me, a lot of people I knew would go over in maybe a summer camp between years, or they go and work in the ski fields. And for me, I was like, somebody is handing me a US visa for 4 months. I am going to New York City.
Yes.
So I waited until the end of my schooling, and I went and did that.
Wow.
And so for me, I was like, I'm going to New York, was kind of where I started. And I wasn't quite sure how that was going to happen. But I was super lucky that I met somebody who worked for Kevin Roberts, a lady by the name of Carolyn Boel, just over there in the Saatchi's building. And after talking, she was kind of basically, are you interested in doing an internship at Saatchi and Saatchi? And I was like, I am so interested in doing an internship in Saatchi and Saatchi. So from there, literally my first job 2 weeks out of university was on a plane to New York City, where I'd never been before, and an internship with Saatchi and Saatchi. It was .com boom. All the youngsters were off at .coms. It was really hard to find people, so timing was super on my side. And from there they sponsored me, and I ended up being in New York for 4.5 years with Saatchi's, which I loved it. My my motto was see the world with Saatchi & Saatchi. And from there I moved to London actually, and not with Saatchi & Saatchi, so the motto kind of fell through pretty quick. But worked for an advertising agency over there, discovered Europe, pan-European business, absolutely loved that. I was working on really big customers, so my clients included Procter & Gamble, Johnson & Johnson, kind of the guys who invented FMCG marketing, branding, all of that. So it's an incredible introduction to the world of brands and consumer insights. I then decided, I'd been away for 7 years, it was time to head home. I came back here, did a year again across the road at Saatchi & Saatchi's, decided that advertising actually wasn't for me. I wasn't as passionate about it. I felt in account management, you don't quite have ownership. Either the creatives owned the creative or the clients owned the brand. And I wasn't quite sure I wanted to be the in-between person. So I looked at either strategic planning or marketing, and got a job at New Zealand King Salmon, which was wonderful. So working for a great New Zealand company, clearly through my mum, have a big interest in food and wine, really important part of my life. So I did that. 9 months later, as they used to back in the day, there was an advertisement in the paper. They were starting a New Zealand distribution arm for Moet Hennessy, and they wanted a founding staff. And I was lucky enough, 9 interviews later, and psychometric testing later, to get the role of brands manager for New Zealand when they started here.
Wow.
So that was awesome. And 2.5 years I was promoted to Australia. So I looked after Moet and Dom Perignon for Australia. And 2.5 years later, I was promoted to Japan and was the account director for Dom Perignon, which is crazy big business in Japan and just amazing, and all the wines. And then from there, again, 2.5 years later, came back here to be country manager for Moet Hennessy, New Zealand and Pacific Islands. So I had to change my motto to see the world with Moet Hennessy, which was great, and absolutely loved. Challenging, tough, all of those kind of things as well, but some incredible perks, as you can imagine, working for those world-leading brands within the luxury space. And then came back, ran New Zealand for 5 years, and it was time for a change at that stage. I didn't want to go away again. I wanted to stay here. It's kind of, I've done my two tours. Actually, I want to be here. And ended up at the end of 2019 changing my life completely. I quit Moet Hennessy, and everything changed. And I mean, a lot of people, everything clearly changed because of COVID. COVID was probably one of the smaller changes that was happening in my life at that time. So I had a partner that I got together with earlier that year. I gave up my role. I decided to do a master's. I decided to start a business. And then the world stopped. And so it was just the weirdest. It was so different. And such a change. And I think for me, I'd always been, and it's something my mum always says, I'm always on to the next thing. She's like, Katie, just enjoy what you're doing. Stop trying to look for the next thing. And I think for the first time, I was kind of like, wow, well, clearly I have no choice now. And it was really good for me. And given I'm so kind of learning motivated, anything's great for me if I can frame it in this is a learning experience. So for me, it was like, okay, this is what I'm learning. I'm learning to be in one place. I'm learning to not be rushing, not be changing, but being here and being present and doing that for a while and having to kind of have patience with the world around me. So it was complete change, and I suddenly every second, after a year we moved in, and suddenly every second week I'm, co-parenting his children. And it was a very, very, very different time. But and now I'm consulting and, doing a lot of those different things you mentioned in the intro, but bringing all that cool experience I had from around the world to bear on what's happening now. But super big adjustment.
So I'm going to go back for a second. Curious that, the first, I think it was the first Moet Hennessy opportunity, and 9 interviews and psych testing. What have you ever thought about what brought you to the top of the list? Like, what was it that... where you really stood out, obviously?
met somebody who worked for Moet Hennessy at an industry, I was working for King Salmon at some industry drinks, and I said, look, this job, I've just seen this job, I'm really interested in it. He said, send me your resume and I'll forward it. I was like, okay. So I did, and I didn't hear anything, and then I followed up, and he's like, oh, clearly hadn't done it, but then he did, and the HR lady called me back and said, we've had, back in the day, I think now every job online gets a whole lot, but she kind of said we had 93 applicants or something.
Wow.
We're only interviewing people from the wine industry, but because you've been recommended by somebody internally, it came through somebody internally, basically, we have to give you an interview.
Wow, interesting.
Okay. So I went through the first interview process, which went well. I mean, to them, I think the fact that I had global experience, I had worked for these big brands, was really useful, and not something they saw so much of within the applicants at the time. But then I kind of only just got through to the next round. But the next round was a case study. And the case study was, tell us who you think the Moet Hennessy, the Moet and Chandon consumer is in New Zealand. And coming out of advertising, I was like, this is me. I know this, I understand.
My moment to shine.
Yeah. I understand consumers, I understand customer profiling, customer journey. So I did a whole kind of mood board of, here are the people, and here's what they do, and here's how they live, and here's where they holiday, and everything. And I think that they were super, that kind of did the job, so to speak.
Yeah.
So that was real, wow, you've really gone above and beyond.
Cool.
Very cool. Yeah,
Yeah.
that explains that very well.
Yeah.
You've had so much international experience, and it's something we're really interested to tap into.
Yeah.
What were some of those key learnings from, your experience across New York, Japan, Australia, all those different places?
Yeah, so I think for me, it's understanding that culture's actually really different in different countries. And particularly within a work context can be super different. I mean, I'm not even going to go into, societal culture, but work culture is very different within different countries. And we're just talking about this before we started recording this. But, my first job was in New York City. So you get very used to, that was how I learned to do work.
Yeah.
So you were always incredibly enthusiastic, really full on. Here's what I can do, here's what I'm good at, here's how I can change things, and that was great. And the other weird thing was you kind of left your personal outside the office. So you came to work, you did your work, it was advertising, there was a lot of crazy stuff going on. No one, you just, no, when you're there, you're professional, you're doing your job, and you leave all that other stuff outside the office. Yeah. Fascinating. I mean, I was also in advertising, so I was going around all the country, sitting behind two-way glass, listening to consumers the whole time talk about their babies and Pampers or dog breeders. So I was learning a lot, actually, about culture and consumers in an American context. And then I moved to England, and suddenly everything was 100% different. And I tried to show up as I had showed up in New York. And I remember at one stage, my boss at the time was a great girl, really smart. I'd been given the lead on one project, and she'd called a client, or a client had called her, and she'd made a whole lot of decisions about the product about the project. And I was so and I sent her this email, what are you doing? This is my project. And she pulled me aside, and she's like, you cannot do this. This
doesn't work like that here.
Does not work like that.
Wow.
You can't show up like that. And that was very, it was super confronting for me, because I just thought I was doing what I do. And that, I think, was probably the first insight into working with different cultures. And so then for me, I think, as you move on and you move into different cultures and different places, really understanding what are those cultural norms, cultural differences, how can you impact, what are some things, particularly as you get into management and leadership,
What can you change? What can you not change because it's hard baked into the culture? And where can you make impact and difference?
Yeah.
And how do you work with a group of people within a different culture that you might not be so aware of? So for me, collaboration, listening to, in my words, in this context as an expat, the locals, so to speak, and really using them and relying on them as the experts within a culture was super necessary and super important, particularly within marketing, where it's all about consumers and how you reach consumers and influence behaviour in a foreign context. That's very difficult unless you have experts that you're relying on, which when you've got a team of Japanese in Japan, they're the experts, not me.
Yeah. Wow.
You know, I mean, we've had the chance to kind of talk about your journey before a bit, and I'm always taken by the points at which you made quite significant decisions, and you know, including the one to come back to New Zealand after a period of time, and I guess, you know, after having had such extensive overseas experience, you're now working in New Zealand, and you're now working not with big globals, but you know, small, you know, some smaller and medium-sized enterprises. Can you talk a little bit about what you think SMEs or New Zealand businesses can learn from how business is done internationally, and what some of your learnings were around some of the things that you needed to acknowledge and do differently?
Yeah, sure. Just to pick up on one of the things that you mentioned just before that about the big decisions too, because I kind of sometimes look at my life and think you've been quite passive about certain things, and then I realise that actually at certain points of my life, which have been the most successful times, there's been a massive intentionality there. And it was like moving to New York, and my mum called me at some stage and she's like, "Oh, Katie, I've just been clearing out your room," or someone was like, "Oh, thanks, great, I've been gone for a year, but that's fine." And she's like, "I found all your old school books," and I was meticulous, like scrapbooking, so I used to have like covered them in scraps of wallpaper and then pictures, and you know, just made these elaborate school books for my writing books. And Mum said, "You know, I found all your old books, and every book has the same 2 words on it." And this was like 11 and 12 and 10, right? And she's like, "It's the same words on every book, and those 2 words are New York." So like as a 10-year-old, that was like my aspiration, you know? And it's just weird how different times this intentionality of purpose and I want to get back to New Zealand and I want a GM role and, you know, food and wine. So just that thing about making decisions is really...
While you're on that, because, and then we'll go back to the question, but I think that's so important to just pause and talk about intentional and intentionality. I think, you know, and not every day maybe, but at critical moments, it's really important. I think every day probably it's important too, but you know, and that's why, you know, that, you know, I kind of went back to the decisions that you've made.
It is weird because sometimes I feel that I do a bit of shifting, you know, like actually when I was in Sydney, every place I've always lived, I thought I was going to live there forever.
Right, interesting.
Except for Japan, which was different because I was on a 3-year, you know, just a 3-year contract.
Okay.
But you know, so I was in Sydney and I literally had a meeting with a bank manager to talk about mortgages, and the MD at the time pulled me, you know, "Well, can I see you?" So I was like, "Yeah, cool." So I went into his office thinking, "Oh my God, what have I done? Like, this is very unusual." And he's like, "So there's this position in Tokyo, you know, are you interested?" And I had thought in that situation that I would say no, thank you very much, and that would be a sign that I was going to move on from Moet Hennessy eventually. But weirdly, my stomach went, "Yeah, okay."
Excited.
So I went, "Yeah, that sounds great. I'm super interested." And yet at other times, been very clear on, you know, I think there was another conversation with some colleagues of mine from Paris, and one of them was the international director for Dom Perignon, and you know, and they're kind of joking around and like, you know, in a few years' time, Katie, when you're in that seat in Paris, and you know, you're doing this, and we've all moved on,
not to say that I was ever going to, but you know, but I suddenly went, oh my God, I don't want to do that. I want to go home.
Yeah.
You know, so intentionality is super important at certain times, but for me, it's also quite a gut thing too. But where I have been, so yes, flexibility I think is really important combined with the intentionality, because you know
what you just said though is, you know, trusting your gut.
Yeah, totally. So I mean, there's definitely major. Like I left school a year early and went to university a year early because that's what I want to do. You know, the New York, these moments, massive moments in my life have absolutely been because I really wanted to do something and I went and did it. But yeah, it would have been hard for me to rationalise exactly what was happening. It's way easier to post-rationalise it.
But you obviously had to be real with yourself in those moments because, you know, I'm sure you also imagined yourself in Paris being like, that could be fun for a season.
Oh, yeah.
But being real with the idea of actually success for me right now looks like going home and that's actually what's going to make me happier.
Yeah, I think so. And I think those times of kind of quiet and peace are really important, as well as that, you know, I'm a very achievement driven person, but I'm not someone who can always be on. I need times of reflection and times of down, and you know, that is every day, every week, every weekend, but it's also every few years, you know, if you look at life in chunks of 7, 5, 10 years, it's important, I think, in that to have downtime as well.
Yeah. Amazing.
So just respecting that there might be listeners who will go, now you get back to the question that you asked us, which, if I can remember what it was, we will, but I think it was sort of related to SMEs or New Zealand businesses and, you know, in general, you know, learning how business is done internationally. Are there things that, given how much experience you've had outside of NZ, but with a passion, you know, and this being home, have you been able to kind of translate some of those things into, you know?
Yeah, look, I think absolutely one of the things you see internationally and with these businesses is none of these uber successful global, I mean, Bernard, I know, who is a majority shareholder of LVMH, and it's his kind of creation, is like fighting with Elon Musk for richest person in the world, like uber successful. Procter & Gamble, none of them, or even we'd look at the stories of the Moet family who started Moet and Chandon, the Vogue family as it was, or the Hennessy family. No one gets to be huge and successful without being bold. So, like, I have a little post-it which I read, which for me personally, but I feel like this is also the advice for businesses. It's like, be bold and step into your space. Like,
brilliant.
Just do it. Don't be scared. Don't worry. But if you do, commit to it. Like, commit to it fully and go hard, because everybody else in the world is also trying to do it, you know, and that's cool, and that's the reality. You're never going to have an idea, I don't think. Maybe you will. Insane, great, awesome. Bernard, I know, certainly did, but you know, like, everybody else is thinking similar things. If you start, I've got an idea for a product, probably other people are too. What differentiates? It's being bold, and committing fully, but like not being afraid. I've got an incredible friend of mine who I met years and years ago when I lived in New York, who lives in Wyoming now, and she has a day job and a family, and she's, you know, saved hard and bought a couple of businesses, and the one thing she's done now is like totes. So like, I love New York, but now she does them for everywhere, and she's just got them ranged in Hudson News, which is concessions, like, you know, and I said to her, I was like, wow, what, did you have an agent? Like, how did you? She's like, honestly, she's like, I am no longer afraid of anyone. I will hustle and do what I need to do. She's like, I just kept talking to the buyer and talking to them until it happened. No, and I feel like that's what you need to do.
And we get that. We are so privileged, Katie, in our world to work with owner managers. Some people think it's luck or happen by chance, but it's grit. It's it's the passion. You have to have a passion to be bold and step into your space.
Yeah.
In order to be bold and step in. But then it takes perseverance. It's just hard work.
Yeah,
definitely.
As I would say to my partner's 8-year-old daughter, you can't give two fudges. You just got to get on with it. Like, just do it. It's
Yeah, and not giving up.
Massive.
Massive.
My mum said that to me once. She's been super successful in her career. I was like, wow, and she said, look, one of the things is, and this is not to take anything away from my mother, who's phenomenal and had a phenomenal career, but she's like, I didn't give up. I stayed. She's like, a lot of other people went off and did different things. She's like, I stayed the course.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's a funny balance, because I 100% agree with that. Not giving up on one level, and yet part of it is knowing when to give up. But it's not giving up; it's knowing when to change or make a change,
reframe.
which is again goes back to some of what you've done, where it's you didn't give up on being in one place to be in another. You just made a conscious decision that
and I think that's. No, and I mean, the other point is not just that. That on itself is great, but again, pointing at windmills, writing to windmills, you've got to have something that's going to work. So having, I think, that really clear idea of what you're actually trying to achieve and underneath, because, even when I started my little business as part of my master's, I remember talking to Alex, who's the CEO at Naveya and Sloane. And I was like, I'm starting a business. He's like, honestly, and I also talked to Malcolm Rands, is it, from EcoStore? And both of them were kind of like, no matter what you think you're starting with, whatever it's going to end up is going to be so different. And you just need to listen to your customers, because what you think they need is so not what they think they need. Like, it's going to pivot, it's going to change. But if you're clear on why you're there or what you're doing or what your passion is, absolutely strategy needs to change and pivot.
So interesting. Can we talk a little bit about a mountaintop moment, but also on the other side, a deep valley challenge, something that's been hard?
Well, I can start with the deep valley that turned into a high mountain.
Yeah, that's perfection. Let's go with that.
So moving to Japan is probably for me, as I said, it was this kind of gut movement, like, yeah, sure, I'll move to Japan. That sounds awesome. And then I got there, and the first night I was there, I was sitting on the balcony of this little, serviced apartment, and I was just like, oh my God, what have I done? I'm in this crazy city. I know nobody. I don't speak a word.
Yeah, wow.
Like, how am I ever going to get back to my suburb? Because every word is new, And I'd got this advice, which was from somebody who said, look, there's a lot of politics happening, and you've got to be very careful to stay neutral and that, and someone else had said, well, actually, like, Japanese people don't really like foreigners coming in, like, they don't want people, they know what they're doing, they don't want kind of this expats parachuting in and telling them what to do. And someone else had been like, don't do anything for the first 3 months because you're going to be judged by everybody. And, you hear these horror stories about people who don't like, these parachuted in expats. So they just don't do anything for 5 years, So I kind of turned up in this probably too much preparation negative. So I was quite stressed about what I was going into. And it was, the people were gorgeous, they were amazing, but it was hard. I had, some of that, they're kind of like, who are you? What are you doing here? There was definitely a bit of kind of good-natured hazing happening. And it was really, really hard. And about 6 months in, I was exhausted. I didn't really, I hadn't found my place. I didn't fit. And then June, who was my boss, who, is a good friend of mine, we get on really well, but she did this great 360 exercise. And then for us who are kind of in the leadership team, we then had a coach, and I'm sitting there looking at the 360 being like, this isn't where I want to be, like, I'm not happy, and the woman kind of went, well, this is like the oldest story in the book, so it's not new, it's not particularly insightful, but she was like, maybe you're just not being yourself. And I was kind of like, and I was like, oh my God, it's so true. I'm so stressed about like how I'm appearing to everybody that I'm not actually letting myself
authentic
be me.
Yeah.
So then I actually just relaxed. But I did some hard work. Like I did spend a lot of time building these relationships, building the trust, doing what they said, which was not trying to impose my view, but work really collaboratively with my team, so that they felt like they were part of the decision making, which I needed them to be because I was new. I didn't know the culture, where the brand sat in the market, the structure of our customers. Yeah. And it changed, it really changed, it really evolved. I figured out, again, where I could impact, where I could make a difference, what I was trying to achieve with the strategy for the brands, and gradually won people onto my side to the point where by the second year, it was incredible. Like I just had this incredible relationship with my team and other members of the greater area of the sales team, and we accomplished some really awesome things, particularly for Dom Perignon, which was at that stage, a reasonably dusty brand. We completely repositioned it, looked at a new target, had some really great activations, launched a new product at like a 30% premium and sold out in 6 weeks. It was really, really incredible and one of the highlights of my life,
Wow.
But gosh, it came from a really, really tough, stressful position. And I don't mean that with any disrespect to anybody. Absolutely. It was just very hard being in a different culture, kind of transported there.
But you didn't give up, right?
Well, no, but I also didn't have a chance to, I didn't have an option, so you just did it. I just did it and just got through. But that whole relax and actually just stop putting so much pressure on yourself, and kind of let it flow a bit more, was definitely worth it, and definitely helped.
Yeah, cool.
So I took you back before to your childhood, and I'm going to sort of semi-go there again, but what advice would you give your younger self? Anything that you would do differently? I think not really. As a child, I was pretty kind of fine with how that all rolls. I think I think probably almost when I got older, and it's what was there in that story I just told about Japan, is somehow figuring out how not to care about what you think people are thinking, or about you, about your situation. I've always been a little bit anxious in that way, and I think it's, if I'd just kind of got on with it, that would have been quite useful.
Any tips for people?
It's interesting because I think if you're taking yourself back to your New York self, because in some ways that's, I think there's an element of that in having kind of thicker skin, but just being more confident
Look, absolutely. Yeah, I think so. And, you get it, it's what you're told as well. So if people are telling you, you're too much or whatever, then, you're like, oh, God, okay. So I think trying to figure that out, just be like, no, it's okay, is important. And then it also took me a long time to realise I didn't have to do things on my own, and that it was way better to do things together, cool. and work with people. And, when you're hired for a job, you're not hired, like, nothing is static. You're not hired for that job based on your experience at that particular time. Like, growing and learning within a role, you're not expected to know everything about everything the minute you step into a job. And I think sometimes when I was younger, that's what I kind of thought. So whereas now I'm very much more about learning and growing and talking to people and leaning on people when I in my roles and as I grow. Whereas I was a little bit afraid to show that earlier in my career.
That vulnerability and that sense that I'm the leader, therefore I should have all the answers.
Totally.
And I still think, if you look at the evolution of leadership, it's increasingly obvious that that's not necessarily what it's about.
Clearly, and the world is changing so fast. It's nothing, it's what I kind of meant by nothing is static. Like it's just all changing so fast. Even if you're the best leader and perfect for the job, and a week the job's changed, so you also have to change too.
Yeah. We ask all the guests that come on a seat at the table, what does a seat at the table mean to you? And have you ever felt like you didn't have a seat at the table?
Yes, I think it would be very hard to be a woman of my age and feel like you'd always been welcome and had a seat at every table you'd been at. I weirdly, when Hillary Clinton was standing for president, I remember reading an article, and I'm an avid reader of the New York Times, still one of the hangovers from those days. And the article was talking about how college-age girls were not going to vote for Hillary Clinton. And they were like, we don't need to. Like, we've arrived. Women have arrived. We don't need to vote. And the lady who wrote the article was like, that's because they haven't worked in the workforce and they don't understand that actually you haven't. Like, and clearly, as we've seen, since post that time, it's still quite hard being a woman in certain respects, particularly at the moment, in America. Won't go there. But for me, it is about, feminism is about being equal. It's about equality and it's about respect for all people. So having a seat at the table is respect, earned, clearly, but, listening and respecting people's opinions. I think, one of my people I really, really look up to and find fascinating is Gloria Steinem. And I heard her speak a few years ago at the Auckland Writers' Festival. And up until then, I'd always really just taken for granted that, particularly working in these big companies, that work was very hierarchical, that you worked within hierarchical structures, and that's just how it was, and you deferred to people further up the food chain, as it was. And I think that was the first time I heard her speak. She was so amazing. And then I read a book on the road, and she talked about Indigenous circles of consensus, decision making. And honestly, it sounds ridiculous, but it was the first time I kind of been like, there's other ways that you can do this. And that was a really big influence for me. So, and now and I've definitely been guilty of it too, because I've been in hierarchical structures of behaving like that to people, at different levels of the organisation. But for me, that real understanding of that respect and everybody having a round table. I mean, at some stage, of course, there's decision making. You understand that people have different levels of experience and responsibility and accountability. So I would never take away from that. But just making sure everybody gets heard and respected and brings their experiences and skills to the table is really important. And that, to me, is what that means.
Yeah, amazing.
And maybe that's the answer to the next question. So if it is, but you now sit on multiple boards, as Briar said in the introduction, including Naveya and Sloane and Auckland Theatre Company, and Great Potentials Foundation. So all very different organisations in lots of ways, I'm sure. What makes the foundation, for a successful board, or what role does diversity play in this, and what role does diversity play in this? And I mean diversity, not just gender or ethnic, but diversity of thinking, diversity, Yeah,
there's two. I mean, I'll just differentiate here between the governance boards that I'm on, which is the Great Potentials and and
Auckland Theatre.
Company.
Yeah.
And advisory board, which is Naveya and Sloane. So I'll just leave the advisory board aside for a second because I think that's a bit different. But in terms of governance, to me, the number one point on that is just it's not management, it's governance. So having a good understanding of the difference between those two is really important, so that you are setting the strategy, setting the kind of really high level stuff, the CEO, all of that, but you're not getting into the weeds and interfering with the running of the company. I think is really important. In that then, so within governance, look, absolutely, businesses, people, they operate within the world. And it's something that both the organisations I sit on is really important, is to actually have a matrix. What does this organisation need? Who are we? What is the community we're serving? Who are the members of this organisation? What is our vision for the future? And in terms of governance, is that reflecting all of that? And do we have the right skills between us to be able to fulfill that function of governance? So by that definition, it has to be a group of diverse people who bring different skills, experiences. Saying that, they need to be relevant to the particular context of what you are governing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, incredible answer.
I've got one more.
Yeah, go
Okay.
for it.
What do people misunderstand about you most?
When I'm like kind of quite, I think quite hard. Like everyone always laughs. My parents do it. Like if you're reading the newspaper and someone talks to you, no, you don't hear because you're reading the newspaper, and that's what you're concentrating on. And sometimes in work I can be a bit the same. So I know, the president of Japan, James at the time, who is incredible and was my sponsor really, who was responsible for me moving to Australia and then to Japan, has been a hugely influential, wonderful support to my career. One of his feedbacks though was, you've got to stop being so, you come across as really rude to people. And I was like, well, what do you mean? I'm not being rude to people. But because I'm super focused on the thought, on the ideas and what I'm thinking, I get that really quite intense kind of, staring thing. And it's not that I'm staring and intensely thinking about you. I'm thinking about what I'm doing and I'm thinking about the ideas. Yeah. So I can get a little bit into that world, and it can be portrayed or come across as I'm super intense to you, and I'm kind of not smiling and engaging on a lighter level because I'm really focused.
Yeah, interesting. That is interesting.
I haven't seen that.
No. Give me the whiteboard and we'll do a bit of brainstorming. Obviously it's contextual, but I think that is something that I realise has been a thing.
What would you say your superpower is when it comes to working with businesses? You do a lot in the strategy space as well. Maybe unpack that.
So for me, I think what I'm quite, what I really believe is and I love it. What I really believe I'm, my superpower, so to speak, or what I'm good at, is taking a whole lot of information. So really, really diverse information and a whole lot of data, which kind of luckily is more and more these days in marketing, so more and more useful, but really being able to pick out what's important in it. So what is the insight, what's relevant, what's going to make the difference. So just taking a massive, sorry, I realise it's a podcast, so people can't see my
She's got her arms out
around the world in front of me, but all this different data and all this different information, and find how to simplify that and find the truth and the insight within that, and then turn that into actually something that's useful. I think that also, those two aspects of the find the truth, find the insight, but then also make it useful, is really important to be able to do together. So, you know, and that's one of the things I'm really enjoying with my consulting at the moment is not, I mean, you know, everyone's had the consultants who come in and here's the deck and what, you know, and then it sits in a drawer and never gets out. But what I'm really enjoying, which is what I did at Milk Books, and I've just finished with Milk Books, and I'm working with another cool New Zealand company called Lanico, which is completely different, making wool-based air filtration media. But it's actually, I'll say, look, it's actually better for me to embed with you and teach your teams how to use this. So you know, with Milk Books, it was like, let's have a look at your marketing team, let's have a look at what it could look like, and the rest of your company, from, you know, C-level all the way down, whether it's them or somebody else, and this is what I've done means, and this is how to use it practically, and, you know, like literally this social media post you're doing, this is how the strategy connects to your messaging within it. So it's really helping make something a living, breathing organism within the company, not just you know, strategy on a piece of paper is a fire starter. You know, it's not until bring it to life that it's meaningful. You know, marketing doesn't happen in a vacuum. Marketing happens when you're changing a consumer's mind or influencing their purchasing habits, and that is about something living and breathing and being, not just thinking.
Do you think that was always a superpower? Like, did you think, you know, I mean, when you go back to even universe and you're coming out and you're trying to make decisions around what you do next and apply, was that a superpower that you applied into most environments that you've been in? And I guess the reason for asking that is, you know, can people and should people think about what their superpower is as they're starting out on their career journey and really lean into it, or does it evolve in your view as you go through experiences and you finally get to the point you're now at going, this is what my superpower is and this is how I'm going to apply it?
Yeah, I probably was always quite good at it. Whether I knew it or not, I had no idea. I was definitely attracted to, you know, why do I like advertising? Why do I like marketing? Why do I like general management? Why do I like consulting? Because they're multi-dimensional. You know, you're doing a spreadsheet one day and you're learning about customers, and you need to know about culture, and you need to have good personal skills, and there's so many different facets to it. And I think that's probably why I've been attracted, whether that was consciously, and I certainly never gave a response in an interview that was that. You know, and to me, but again, it is a skill rather than an experience, you know, and I think that's why actually recruiting, and, you know, I've been on both sides of that page, both as a recruiter and a recruitee, hiring for capability and skills is so much more important than hiring for experience, because if you hire someone based on what they've done, you've got no idea. I mean, you've got a general idea, like if I've been successful in marketing and advertising, hopefully I've got those basic skills, but you don't really know what somebody's super skills or super strengths are unless you're taking a different view of that. So I thought, I think it's really important. I think being able to articulate what you're good at, great, but as a young person, I mean, just what are you it's that whole idea that do you accentuate your strengths or do you work on your weaknesses? And I think probably, honestly, I know the answer in the books is just work on your strengths. I think probably a little bit of thinking about your weaknesses is never a bad thing either. But if it's, you know, if you're really into it and you really like it, like, go for it. You know, again, kids, right? Oh, you really like piano, you're showing a bit of aptitude for music, go that way. You know, like, don't force yourself on a rugby field if you're really not happy there and you're really bad at it. Like, do the thing that you're good at. But, you know, achievement versus accomplishment too is another thing that I'm really keen on at the moment. Again, I read an article in the New York Times about it a few weeks ago.
but it talked about some dad. I don't know if you know the story, but it was I do not know his name. He'd written the article. He'd taken on the New York Board of Education because his son was awesome at magic tricks. And there was no time for his son to practice his magic tricks because there was too much homework. So he took on the Board of Education to say, there is too much homework, my kid needs more time to practice his, and I don't know if he won or not, but his whole article was about our world is so geared to achievement, like look at my CV, look at the jobs I've had, like look at my grades at school, like from when you're little. And actually accomplishment is so much more fulfilling. It's external, I guess, versus internal. And for me, I am someone who's always been very externally driven, achievement based. But if there's one thing this whole massive change in my lifestyle showed me is the accomplishments wonderful and rich and rewarding too. Like feeling like I've been in and done this great project for a company and help them with their strategy and help them with their marketing and really achieve something, made a difference to that company. It's not quite as glam as brand director for Dom Perignon in Japan, but gosh, it's so fulfilling and so wonderful,
Yeah, wow, that's amazing. We are at an hour, which is crazy because it's flown by. We love to finish the podcast with one question, and that is, who is one person that you would really like to thank, someone that's been influential in your journey?
Again, so many, so hard. I don't think anyone gets to have cool experiences and such a diversity as I have without a whole lot of people in their world and helping them along the way. Easy answers would be my wonderful parents, but I've already touched on them, so I won't go there. And all the work bosses and people, but I've got a very good friend of mine, Alana, who I met in New York, and we have very different, she's been in finance, very different paths from mine, but we ended up living in Sydney at the same time, and she was in Hong Kong when I was in Japan, and we've had these quite similar journeys. She's uber amazing at what she does, but all through that, I think we met bonding in New York because we'd had a couple of drinks and were crying on the side of the road about how hard it was living in New York as young people. But she's been so supportive and influential for me in that way. When I needed it, always checking in, always been there for me, and hopefully I've done the same for her. But I think having just that support of somebody who's just a really good friend, who's always there for you, has made a huge difference.
It's special.
I love that. True friendship, It's been through it all. It's
amazing.
Very cool. Yeah. Thank you so much for your time. Amazing.
Thank you, Katie.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here.
If you haven't already, check out season 1 to hear similar business and leadership stories empowering diversity and community. See you next month.